Hey, what's up, everybody? It's just Charles Advance and welcome you guys to another episode of the Dreamers Pro Show. We cover everything from sports, hot topics, classic debates, entertainment, and we give you guys a fresh perspective on things and how we see them. So let's get straight into this topic here. So Nick Wright and Stephen A. Smith are going back at it, right? And it seems like we've gotten to the point where people in sports media now going back at for one another. Funny enough, in the independent space, when we first started off, and there were people that started before me, we used to go at guys on TV all the time. But we never saw them go at each other. We used to see the athletes and the journalists have their issues. But then when a lot of these guys jumped into the social media space, you know, next thing you know, it wasn't too long before you saw them going back and forth at each other, right? And I'm like, okay, welcome to the party. Now we all doing it together. But recently, Stephen A. Smith made some comments that were directed towards Nick Wright. And Nick Wright took exception to it because Stephen A. was essentially saying that because Nick Wright had come out and called him a mobster and acting like a mob boss and all of this. And Stephen A. Smith was saying that I know why you're doing it. Like, I know the reason for you doing this, and I know who you work with and your crew. He was essentially alluding to the LeBron connection. So we want to play what Stephen A. Smith had to say here just to give this video some context. And then I want to come back and continue on. Take a listen to Stephen A. Smith here.
So when one of my contemporaries tries to mention me as a mobster, that I'm coming across as a mobster, he knows better. You can, once you figure out who I'm talking about, you can gauge his motives. He should be ashamed of himself. But I'll leave it alone and let him hang out with his crew. And he knows that I know who they are. Okay? The point that I'm making is that it's not me being a mobster. It's me highlighting that we all, as reporters, have access to an abundance of information, whether it's through players, coaches, executives, owners, agents, or even other journalists. Y'all got a community of people y'all communicate with as players, past, present, and future. What makes you think journalists don't have that? You think I can't pick up the phone and call a beat writer that used to cover the Washington Wizards? You think I don't know who used to cover the team?
So you saw that there. So Nick Wright decided to do a rebuttal. And by the way, don't get it twisted that this helps both of them. Their names are, these guys' their names are circulating out there. People are talking about this. This works out wonderfully for them. Don't let them, trick you into thinking, oh, we don't want to know. It helps, right? So anyway, Nick Wright then decided to respond to Stephen A. Smith. And he did it on his show, I think What's Right with Nick Wright or something. And I think he does the show with his son. I could be wrong, but I think that younger gentleman is his son. And he begins to, give his take on it. And he's also taking shots at Stephen A. But then he describes a moment that I think Stephen A. Smith was alluding to, because he was saying that I know who your people are. And Nick Wright was then describing the moment where they met. And then Nick Wright goes on to say that when he met Stephen A. in person, he stepped to him like, hey, man, look, I heard you're pretty upset with me. Do we need to just talk about it? And essentially, Stephen A. Smith just backed down and acted like as if nothing, like there wasn't any issue. So want to play what Nick Wright had to say here in response to Stephen A., him stepping to him, and then we're going to come back and continue on the show. Take a listen to the sound here.
Okay, so now I'm a little upset. And now I would like, as silly as this all is, I am going to eventually make a few requests here that I mean very, very, very sincerely. But before I get to that, I would like to say some things directly. I do not know better, and I am not ashamed of myself. What I said, I stand by 100%. If anybody took my comments as if I were implying that the most successful guy in my industry was an actual literal mobster, for that I apologize. I don't think anybody thought I was truly saying there is an organized crime element to this. I thought it was quite clear I was using a very obvious and very almost cliche analogy of talking to a guy like a mob boss, like, ooh, better be careful. Never know what could happen to you. I think that was crystal clear. And I want to again reiterate, I don't know better than to do that, because that is exactly what I feel happened here with Stephen A. and Jaylen Brown. And it is part of a pattern that we saw for the first time more than a decade ago, when it appeared to me that he threatened Kevin Durant with, again, fuzzy reportage about things he knows that he's just holding on to. And the irony is not lost on me at all that in his response to me, he then did the same exact thing that I was criticizing. Vague, ominous, I know things, but I'm not going to say what they are right now. So before I get to my request, which I am very sincere about, I will do it for him. Cards on the table here. And again, this is my gut. I don't know this. I can't prove this, but what I think he was implying there when he says knows his crew, I think he's implying that because I'm legitimately good friends with Maverick Carter, and because I'm friendly with and have a working relationship with Rich Paul, and because I occasionally am with those guys in a social setting, that me going after him was some type of coordinated, planned attack using the Jaylen Brown story as some proxy war for some ulterior LeBron Stephen A. beef that I am the figurehead for. And when he says, I know his crew, I think he is referencing a very specific moment in time. So again, I, without revealing any confidences, will cards on the table for everyone. And cards on the table is a very interesting word choice by me, because I think he's actually referencing a card game. Because back in September, I was in a fun, not crazy high stakes, not anything, not the type of game I go to Vegas for, but a fun, friendly card game here in the city with not necessarily the people I just mentioned there, but a group of people that could be considered, in that orbit. And Stephen A. stopped by to say hello. And when that happened, because I had heard on decent authority he was upset with me for my previous LeBron commentary, I stood up, I shook his hand, and I said, hey, I hear you're mad at me. Should we talk about it? And he, to his credit, I thought at the time, said, nah, I'm not mad at anybody. I'm paraphrasing. I'm not mad at anybody. I'm a grown man. I got more important things to do. I said, okay, got it. And I sat back down and played cards. He said hello to the people in the room, and then he left.
Great. So you heard what he said there. What are my thoughts about this? Look, I want to talk from the standpoint of Stephen A. What I'm guessing is this. Stephen A probably met Nick Wright in the situation that he described. And I think that he probably wasn't thinking about it as deeply as probably he was initially. So when he saw him, he was just like, yeah, man, I'm done with that, right? Maybe he got over, like, he blew off some steam prior to that. He was like, yeah, man, it's whatever, right? Like, I'm not worried about that. Like, it is what it is, right? Basically, like, just dismissing him and his old whatever it is, right? So it could be that. Then the part about Stephen A saying, I know who you rock with. Well, we revealed it on this channel over 2 years ago that Nick Wright is affiliated with Clutch Sports. And Doug Gottlieb was the one that actually put that information out there. And then I thought somebody else put it out there as well. So if Doug knows that, Stephen A. Smith knows that. Like, these guys all know what's going on in the background. Maybe people like us here, we don't know. And when Doug will say something like that is breaking news for us, but these guys already know what it is. They know who's friends with who's doing backroom deal. Like, they all know who's affiliated with who. They all know it, right? So I don't think Stephen A was referring to that moment when he saw them together and thought, oh, you with them. I think he knew prior to that. But I think Nick is probably saying that because you saw me hanging around with these guys that are in LeBron's orbit, as he says, that maybe he feels like they were there conspiring against him. No, Nick Wright has been taking shots at Stephen A. Smith for a while now. And it's only obvious that Nick, being represented by Clutch Sports, for him to not be cool with Stephen A. Smith, because he has an issue with the agency's biggest client that he's with. So of course he's not meant to be friendly with them and chummy with them. Of course. That makes perfect sense. But in the case of Stephen A. Smith, I think he was looking at it from the standpoint of, I know who you are, dude. I know who you're affiliated with. So I peeped game already a while ago. I think that's what Stephen A. Smith was probably feeling, but I could be wrong. So you guys let me know. Do you think that Nick Wright stepped to Stephen A. Smith and he didn't want no smoke, or it was something else? Whatever you guys think, leave your thoughts in the comments, and we catch you guys on the next show. Peace.